people would be diabetic in India alone, and now the world population say that nearly 40 crores of diabetes at this moment. And poorer outcomes are associated with having diabetes and poor control. And if they present to the hospital and needed an admission, the death rate is relatively higher compared to non-diabetic individuals. And so, by increasing the awareness, we can have a proactive approach to treat this patient very aggressively and look at the long-term management at the time of discharge. So that's the main reason why we need to have a discussion about it. Let's look at diabetes as a not only just a chronic condition with the glucose intolerance, but as an immunosuppressing condition and also pro-inflammatory conditions. We didn't know these things. This is not a new thing. Diabetes is a pro-inflammatory condition because any medication that we use for diabetes, if it has got additional property of anti-inflammatory nature, that is bringing up better outcomes in diabetic patients. And is lung is affected because of this inflammation? We'll talk about it in a minute. And about the immunocompromised state. As you all know, when there is a bacterial infection, there is chemokines that are present to the endothelial wall, and then that attracts the chemotaxis and the white cells circulating around, mainly the granulocytes, and adhere to the lining, and then they migrate and then cause the phagocytosis. And this kind of activity of chemotactis gets disturbed when patients have got hyperglycemia. So that leads to less chemotaxis and less phagocytosis, leading to immunocompromised state. The same thing happened with the monocyte function as well. So the macrophage formation and its action will be impaired. And the complement cascade also don't get excited as much as it should in diabetic patients, and the MAC complex doesn't form, which usually causes the porous nature of the bacteria worse, and thereby the bacteriolysis. This gets impaired as well. So all in all, the immunocompetent person with the diabetes becomes a less immunocompetent person, leading to worse outcomes with infections. And pro-inflammatory conditions. Sorry, yeah. So when you look at the lung in a diabetes, its lung volumes get decreased as the time goes on, purely because of the inflammatory nature of this one, and the glucose gradient between the alveolar cell membrane causes more problems with leading to more bacterial overgrowth. It happens not only because of a one single entity, and it's at a capillary level, and it's a vascular bed gets affected with the stiffness, and the surfactant action gets lesser, and also the nervous system also gets affected because of diabetes, leading to poor volumes. So all in all, this mechanism leads to quite a few other conditions can get associated with diabetes, and or if the person already has it and develops diabetes, gets worse over the time. And just a few examples: asthma. The diabetes and asthma, they both have the common pathogenic pathway, and they all like inflammatory nature, and the genetic kind of makeup is also noted to be more or less starts from the same stem. And the interesting fact is, it is increasingly recognized if someone has got asthma, their offspring, someone has diabetes, their offspring has higher risk of having an asthma. And when you look at the COPD, that means patient has got diabetes, some smoking history, or so, then they develop COPD, their outcome is not as good. And there is association with the right ventricular stiffness, pulmonary hypertension, and pulmonary fibrosis because of the active inflammation, and also lung cancer risk is also noted to be increased in some subsets of diabetic population. But none of this has been established as a potential risk. That means you don't get worried too much saying that, okay, the person developed diabetes, so I have to go and screen for pulmonary hypertension or lung cancer. But it's always better to keep in mind saying that lung can get adversely affected, so it's better to keep an eye on and ask for symptoms every now and then. Now, going to some infection conditions. Just influenza, as we all know that every year when people get admitted to the hospital with a bad influenza, if they're diabetic, their risk of getting admitted into hospital because of hypoxia or like additional lung involvement is much higher. When it goes to like multisystemic dysfunction, the chances of death is much higher with the diabetics, and it's quoted as like 4 times more mortality with the poor glycemic control. And like as a COVID and SARS been proved, saying that having a diabetes poorly controlled during the time or prior to the admission has always had a bad outcomes. And vaccine improves, and as every year influenza changes its strain, and you need to get a new vaccine so every year. Next, pneumonia. As we all know, pneumonia was the killer before the advent of antibiotics, and it still remains the main killer for hospital admission patients, whether it could be community acquired or nosocomial. And diabetics with pneumonia, they have 3 times more risk of death. And people who has got high HbA1c has got a higher hospital kind of admission time, and even people who has got normal HbA1c but they have diabetes, when compared to the people who doesn't have diabetes, they have a higher stay in the hospital and probably increased morbidity associated with it. And this is the reason why the pneumococcal vaccine has been advocated to be given to all the diabetic patients, particularly if they are above 50 years. But if there are some high risk nature, like a previous TB or a cavitation of the other lung disease, you can consider this vaccine as early as 2 years old. And so there are so many societies who recommend, including the Infectious Society ADA, that the pneumococcal vaccination should be offered to all diabetics. And it is nowadays we get the conjugated vaccine. One vaccine will be more
साउंड
than
के
enough
साथ
for a
कारवां
lifetime reasonable immunity conference. So next, without mentioning tuberculosis, it is not complete in a lung kind of situation, particularly in India. I haven't seen many when I was in UK, but coming to India, we did diagnose quite a few patients with pulmonary tuberculosis coming to the clinic as a simple chronic cough. And when you look at it, the latent TB gets activated when the people have got poor glycemic control. And this is the state that we just talked about, and also the condition, the patients like a poor resistance power with the poor glycemic control. Next thing is the diabetes can develop in person who develop a TB, and that can carry increased risk afterwards. So whenever we see somebody in the clinic with a TB, for a pulmonologist or a physician to look for diabetes in them by doing a HbA1c and a random blood glucose on a serial intervals, and also when someone has got diabetes and present with the respiratory symptoms, better to look for TB in India. And so next, why the diabetes needs to be controlled is this one. The diabetes can cause treatment failure and death because of that, and we see that quite often in the TB patients. And multi-drug resistant TB has been shown more often in diabetic patients. And the studies that we look at is most of them were observational studies or retrospective studies. From majority of them are coming from low impact journals. But I've been through them. All we found was essentially it is important to control the diabetes, and the diabetes complications like neuropathy, retinopathy, etc. can be complications of the TB treatment, and liver and renal involvement makes the treatment a little bit difficult, both from diabetes and TB treatment point of view. So all in all, because of this multi-system affection with the TB and the treatment for the TB, it is important to recognize it and treat it appropriately. And one more thing is latent TB activation. Because of the immunocompromised state of the lung, latent TB activation can happen more often in diabetic patients compared to non-diabetic individuals. And the risk is quoted as 10% per year if someone has got poor glycemic control, whereas the immunocompetent person has a risk of 10% of latent TB activation in his whole life. So this gets more fold as the longer you have diabetes and poor control. Next thing is, what could be the best treatment choice for diabetes? And metformin has shown to improve the outcome of the TB in diabetic patients. So the dose, it is dose dependent, cumulative, so the longer use of metformin, the better the outcomes, and 1000 to 1500 milligrams a day, and continuous use. It also improved the culture results as well. So rifampicin resistant strains become like rifampicin susceptible strains after the 2 months use of metformin. So this is one thing. And next thing is insulin. So these are the two things we tend to keep people with the TB and diabetes on to improve their diabetes control, to improve the overall outcome. So moving on the special condition, cystic fibrosis. I was fortunate enough to work in a center where the cystic fibrosis was the tertiary care center. We had quite a bit of population with the cystic fibrosis, and they live longer enough to develop pancreatic dysfunction and diabetes, which we consider as a poor prognosis. And even a slightest improvement in HbA1c has been shown to be significantly beneficial in these patients. And I haven't come across many in the last 2 years where I worked, because my understanding was majority of the cystic fibrosis patients here, they tend to get like a worse from the condition, deteriorate and die far early before they develop any significant complications. And that is one of the reasons. And I've seen people who has the heart and lung transplant as well after cystic fibrosis, and they do very well if you control the glucose significantly. And we treat them when they get the staphylococcus as usual pathology, and then go on to Pseudomonas. And so we need to isolate the strains, look for diabetes in each and every review, and keep the HbA1c 6.5. Imagine these are like a 10, 15 years old people who comes to the clinic, and they do not always follow what you say. So it is very important to have more frequent visits, but very short visits. So they come and stay with you only for 2 to 3 minutes, and you just simply change the management, say that you're doing well, go home, and come back again in a 2 weeks time kind of thing. So that's how you can manage the HbA1c well for them. And I did for nearly a couple of years with cystic fibrosis, and it was very rewarding. It's just like managing diabetes in pregnancy. You see the improvement in HbA1c, people listen to you quite well. But in cystic fibrosis, it's the other way around. You pamper them, but you get the diabetes under control. It's two different things, but you get good satisfaction. And this diabetes makes the life of the cystic fibrosis a little bit hard, but as you know, once you give the simple treatment, it improves the outcomes. So it's worth doing and spending time with it. Next, mucormycosis or fungal lung infections. And as my colleague was saying earlier, people used to see the lung infections in the upper and lower respiratory tract infections, particularly those HIV, cancer, or therapy. But nowadays, people just diabetes and nothing else, they are developing this mucormycosis or another lung cavitation, etc., on a pre-existing whether the TB or some other condition. So diabetes is on the whole essentially a condition that can make the lung vulnerable for infections, gives you a high risk for any underlying condition or predisposition like asthma and COPD, lung fibrosis, pulmonary hypertension, and even the lung cancer. So it's worth recognizing it in diabetic people, and it's always better to be having a bidirectional approach by, if you find a lung disease condition, make sure that they are not diabetic, and vice versa. If someone comes with a lung kind of pathology or symptoms, to investigate them thoroughly to see whether they are at risk of any of these lung conditions or infections, and give the appropriate immunization, and choose the right agent for the treatment depending on the condition. And with that, I'll finish this. Thank you.
Thank you for enlightening us by throwing a light on how the diabetes is associated with lung infections. So in brief, there were a few lung infections which were related to diabetes, which you have enlightened us. Now the floor is open for questions.
Especially infections like tuberculosis, sometimes sugar levels fluctuates beyond our imagination. Now often we need to change the regimen, and how often, many times we have to shift to the insulin. Your experience regarding?
So, just when we say regimen, oral hypoglycemics plus or minus insulin, that's just a very broad term. Among the oral hypoglycemics, we tend to stay away from metformin usually, because these people are very thin. So all you want to do is give some medication that improves their body fat or body mass, and like gliclazide or glimepiride, etc. But essentially, all the studies says that metformin has got anti-inflammatory properties. It's been very well studied, both in US, which is very high quality study, it's retrospective but reasonably high quality, and saying people at this chap has got diabetes and very poor control. This has got diabetes but very well good control. This is a non-diabetic patient. So include metformin in the regimen to start with. Next thing is HbA1c control has to be achieved like less than 7%. And the majority of the people that we see, particularly if they are below below poverty line or just low middle class people, they may not be able to afford to have a self-glucose monitoring at home or frequent glucose checks. So the best thing is, in those kind of patients, twice daily insulin of mixed insulin as a standard regime if they agree to it. or using the glimepiride or gliclazide as a combination to metformin. So metformin plus mixed insulin or metformin to glimepiride or gliclazide kind of combination seems to work much better. The reason being is one, these medications have got a very good range. That means you can start from a small dose and you can go up and up and up, and you keep the target as a fasting between 80 to 120 or 130 for the matter, and postprandial to 180. You need to see the diabetes control in each and every visit, and to keep increasing the doses of it until they reach the maximum. So the regimen doesn't need to be changed, but the tablet strength might need to be changed from time to time. If they already has got poor control, go for insulin on top of metformin straight away. And because insulin is the drug where you don't have a high dose, it all depends on what the patient is having. And a basal bolus regime, that means one basal insulin like Lantus or Toujeo or Degludec with actropid or other oral hypoglycemics in the during the daytime seems to work much better for majority of the patients. So all in all, regimen change has to happen based on the glucose, and these things do vary. Some people, when they respond very well to the antitubercular treatment, their insulin resistance comes down and their insulin doses or the medication dose need to come down. So other people who has got a multi-drug resistant, they need to have the regimen change even from the TB point of view based on their body weight, etc. They tend to have more resistance to the drugs purely because of the combination that we use and the hepatic enzyme activation. So these medications from the diabetes are get metabolized much quicker, and so we might need to go for this one. I would say every visit, however frequently you're visiting the patient, without just compromising his general day-to-day life.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, can I ask one question? So, this wonderful talk, sir. So, it's very informative as well, learning from your experience from UK and also our country. So, one thing why we chose is India is diabetic capital of the world, if I'm not wrong. And also we are having tuberculosis, we are endemic with the TB and also other infections. That's the reason we call it a dual threat, and you summarized it very well. One question for me as well, see, most of our patients are on steroids and they are diabetic, and we're treating asthma and our COPD, they are in exacerbation, we start steroids, as you understand. So most of the time the sugars fluctuate to 400, 500, so we treat daily, day in and day out. So what is your target of sugars when the patient is on steroids and is a diabetic in the hospital? Okay. So, yeah, that's my question.
And I purposefully omitted the inpatient management because you do not need an endocrinologist to do that, and you do look after your patients very well by yourself most of the times. And essentially, the inpatient management, the targets are like the usual good diabetes medication target. The fasting has to be between 80 to 120, and the postprandial should be 180. And not only just the TB, just take a COVID. And we did experience so much of pneumonitis secondary to this COVID-19, and the evidence very clearly suggests that 1 in 4 patients, particularly with the diabetes, has got higher mortality. And it is very, very clear study coming at the second wave of COVID that a patient who has got higher fasting glucose has got more mortality as an inpatient. So this is a very acute situation, easily achievable kind of target in hospital, because in hospital you can do blood glucose test 3 or 4 times a day if the patient allows. You can give insulin 3 or 4 times a day based on the blood glucose, and the target has to be relatively liberal. We are not talking about the pregnancy kind of target where the fasting has to be below 95, 2-hour postprandial has to be below 120. We are not asking that for any of these acute infections or in ITU. Essentially, we are aiming for postprandial glucose less than 180, and pre-meal glucose around 90 to 120. So that is reasonably achievable. But if you're not using the right agents like insulin, it is almost impossible, because patients sometimes they vomit, they don't want to eat. The next evening they eat quite a lot. So how are you going to just change a medication based on their eating habits in the hospital, which changes from day to day? So this is the reason why insulin is a versatile. You give the basal insulin like Lantus and keep that as a 0.2 to 0.4 units per kg body weight. Someone is like a 60 kilograms, you start at 12, you can go up to nearly like a 0.5, like a nearly 30 units, and as a once a day, and you give actrapid kind of insulin or Fiasp, you analog or human insulin doesn't matter, 3 times a day. That way, you can keep the glucose under control. Every sick patient, we recommend this. There are so many studies, both in ICU, in a high dependency unit, saying that how strict the glucose control to be to get the better outcome. And this control I just mentioned is good enough to and equal to IV insulin sliding scale. So that means rather than giving too much of hypo by keeping an IV insulin, not checking the blood sugar every 2 hours, etc., it is better to keep them on 4 to 5 times glucose monitoring that is reasonably intense itself by checking 4 to 5 times, and altering the insulin doses and the medication based on it is the best way. Keep the blood sugars around 100 in the before meal state and below 180 afterwards. And the reason why you call a physician or an endocrinologist purely is you're busy with other stuff. That's more important. You got procedures, you got a clinic, and you got to see the inpatients, and you cannot take 4 times a phone call and adjust them. That's the reason why you need a helping hand. It's not about the knowledge, it's about your time and like spending it wisely, because and to be honest with you, that was my pleasure. Call me, that's okay. And so this is it. And so intense treatment is necessary. Doesn't necessarily need to be an IV insulin, but a basal bolus or basal plus is most versatile thing. You can stop the like OHS during that time very easily, so that you don't get confused yourself. Okay, I gave tablet, patient ate, do you have to give insulin? You don't have to have that kind of dilemma in your mind. You just simply hold up the tablets. At the time of discharge, just look back and see what the patient's presenting HbA1c on his current regime. What's the renal function, liver function like when I'm discharging? Am I discharging with him on steroids? If so, what kind of steroids? Is it once or twice a day? As you know, every steroid has got its own way of like giving the insulin peaks. For example, commonest steroid that you use in Omnicortil or prednisolone. So when you give Visolone, Omnicortil, the peak usually you see in the evening, the trough usually see at the morning. So that means those sugars will be 500 by 5 or 6 o'clock, and 80s or 90s or even hypos by the morning. So you concentrate your medication most in the morning and afternoon. Whereas if it is a dexamethasone or methylprednisolone, it's simply a bit different because it's like a uniformly increased glucose throughout the day. So based on the steroid agent that you use, we just tend to tweak the regimen, and when the steroid doses are coming down, we reduce the insulin doses or the medication dose, and after in the first review after 7 to 10 days time, we just put him back onto the original medication, and the HbA1c that you did at the admission helps me then, so that at least I know this is his usual medication, this is HbA1c, so I need to give him more or less based on his current situation. So do HbA1c on admission, make sure that you do 3 to 4 times a day glucose, go to basal bolus if possible if the patient agrees to insulin. That's the best way you can keep all the sick patients. And during the COVID time, how many people got the IV insulin sliding scale? More or less none. We did subcutaneous sliding scale because the manpower needed to do that kind of thing for that number of patients is almost non-existing anywhere in the world. So only operated patients we did IV, and the rest of them are all subcutaneous sliding scale. It worked like a charm.
Thank you very much, sir.
There's one more question, doctor. Which is the most common atypical presentation of tuberculosis which you have encountered in recent years in a diabetic patient?
Yeah. I did not see any atypical encounter, but I saw the TB in the lymph nodes quite often. And but atypical presentation I saw back in UK. Majority of my colleagues are dentists. They're exposed to TB, and they didn't develop TB then, but they come to UK and they develop a TB, one in the spine and other one in the gut. And they've been going to the ER to say that, okay, I got this back pain, and the ER doctor looks at it and gives some anti-inflammatories and send them home. Their ESR was the only thing that goes up, and they have some typical sweating episodes. And because they are from India, and everyone gets a doubt, and when they ask for an MRI or anything, they didn't get it straight away because there is 2 or 3 months waiting list. So what they did was they come to India, had an MRI scan, got the diagnosis, went back and got the treatment there. And the gut TB was even more difficult to diagnose, and essentially in here, what I saw were straightforward, but their presentation was quite insidious. So they didn't come up with a very severe pneumonia until too late. So they have these symptoms because the immunosuppression means you don't get the immune response as good as well at times. So they didn't have the classic fevers and everything for a long time. And they were unwell, they're losing weight, just you do with the poor glycemic control. Their glycemic control is getting worse because of the active infection. They come to hospital a little bit late, but by the time they come in, they have too many cavities cavitations because they didn't suspect it because the cough was not that bad. As I said, the lung volumes reduce with the diabetes and the cough reflex can get worse. So they tend to get more ill more quickly at some tipping point.
If there are no questions, I think we can move to the next speaker. Thank you once
Thank you.
again.